Hello, folks. We are reading Chapter 6 from Posted by John David Anderson. The Fish. The day Bench almost got us all killed was the day I knew we were inseparable, that he'd always have our backs. It's no exaggeration. I really did think we were about to die, or at the very least, be beaten to sacks of bloody mush. I can still remember being called names while dodging through a playground full of little kids. I can still remember the look of terror on Dee Dee's face, the same look he got when we made him watch Jaws for the first time. Can still remember the bigger of the two kids nearly chasing after me, then tripping, planting his face in the mulch. But mostly I remember Bench telling me he'd pay me back. It was this past summer, before 8th grade, unseasonably cool enough that we all wore hoodies with our shorts. We were at Freedom Park, Brayton's most popular stretch of green, complete with a plastic playground and a field big enough to fly kites in. We'd met up because our parents collectively kicked us out. Bench was back from whatever athletic camp his parents had shipped him off to. Wolf had just returned from a music competition in Grand Rapids. Dee Dee was desperate to start a new Dungeons and Dragons campaign. There was talk of succubae. But the cloudless sky and our parents' nagging forced us into the park instead. Wolf brought Capri Suns. Dee Dee brought leftover naan to munch on. I brought the soccer ball. None of us played soccer, unless you count my brief stint on the worst team in the 7-8-year-old division 6 years ago. But Dee Dee was literally incapable of catching a baseball, and we were tired of shooting hoops in Bench's driveway. Dee Dee could run, at least, almost as fast as Bench, and if the ball happened to roll in front of his foot, he had a better than 50-50 shot at kicking it. Unfortunately, he still didn't have any aim. So when he shanked his first shot of the afternoon well to the right of the trees we were using as goals, it sailed into a group of high school kids, knocking over a can of Mountain Dew, making me wonder if we shouldn't have taken Dee Dee bowling instead. There were 4 of them sitting in a circle. 2 guys, 2 girls, probably juniors or seniors. Wolf said they looked like they were his brother's age. Maybe his brother even knew them. Dee Dee shot, bowled over the soda, and the ball came to rest by one of the boys, a tall, blonde kid with gelled stiff hair and a too-tight shirt. He grabbed the ball and stood up to face us. Dee Dee apologized, of course, though he was too far away for the kid to hear his mumbling. The 3 of us came and stood beside him. Wolf held his hands out for the ball to get the ball back. The boy holding it looked at the girl in the grass beside him, a watch this glance if I ever saw one. Then he twisted and gave my soccer ball a tremendous kick, smashing it clear the other direction, another 50 yards easy. Payback, I guess. I started to go after it when I felt Bench's hand on my arm, stopping me. "Hey!" he called out. The high school kids looked over at us. Bench took a couple steps toward them. "Hey," he said again, "that's our ball." "Then go and get it," the boy who kicked it said. The girl sitting beside him brought a hand to her face, embarrassed. But the other 2 kids just smiled at each other. Bench wasn't smiling, though. He had his game face on, the one he always wore despite never playing when it mattered. He was still walking, getting closer and closer. We followed, afraid to let Bench go by himself, but a step behind. "You're the one that kicked it over there," he said. "You go get it." The boy shook his head. "You're lucky I didn't cram it down your throat." His friend stopped smiling. I suddenly felt a pain in my stomach. This wasn't like getting nudged. These kids were a lot bigger than us, and strangers. In school, there were rules. There were people watching, at least most of the time. I wasn't the only one concerned. Wolf leaned over, speaking softly. Bench, it's all right, man. Let's just get the ball. Bench shook his head. But that guy's a jerk. It was an accident. Dee Dee didn't mean to. All right, he's a jerk. The world's full of 'em. Let's just go get our ball and go. Wolf pulled on Bench's arm. Bench resisted at first, but with the second tug, his feet pulled loose, and we dragged him across the field to where the soccer ball sat. I bent over and picked it up, all the while watching the two older boys watching me, part of me burning at giving them the satisfaction. Nothing worse than knowing you're right and somebody else is wrong and still being on the losing end. Let's just go back to my house, I said, suddenly wanting to be anywhere else. I figured that was the end of it. We started walking toward the playground where our bikes were racked, the swings and slides full of carefree kids, little ones who didn't need a tribe yet, because when you're 5, everybody's a member. I kept stealing glances at the cluster of high schoolers off to our left now. The blonde one had his back to us, but one of the girls was still looking our way. We'd have to pass by them, but not close enough to matter. Bench reached over and grabbed the soccer ball from my hands. I owe you a ball, he said. What? Get ready to run, he added. Before any of us could say anything or reach out to stop him, Bench veered left, taking just enough steps to ensure his accuracy. Then he hurled the ball as hard as he could, one-handed, baseball style, right on the mark. It rebounded off the back of the bigger boy's head with enough force to nearly knock him over. I could actually hear it bounce off the kid's skull, a strangely satisfying thump. The next thing I heard was Bench's voice screaming, "Go, go, go!" We tore through the grass, all 4 of us, Wolf, Dee Dee, and me out in front, Bench catching up quickly, waving us on like Indiana Jones fleeing from a pack of angry natives. One look behind me confirmed that both of the teenage boys were on their feet in pursuit, cursing at us, demanding that we get back here. My shoes skidded in the mulch as I ducked under slides and bridges, heading for the bike rack, thankful that none of us bothered to chain up. I glanced again just in time to see the one who'd kicked my ball go down, slipping to avoid running over a toddler, getting a mouthful of mulch. Mensch was right beside me, grinning like an idiot. "Did you see that?" he said. I didn't have time to yell at him or tell him how stupid he was and how we were about to be murdered in the middle of a playground, or what a great throw it was, and maybe he should try out for quarterback, or even ask him why he did it. But I didn't need to ask him that. You make your tribe. You protect each other from the wolves. We hopped on our bikes and kicked off, careening into the street and pedaling as fast as we could from the 2 screaming teenagers swearing to hunt us down and kick our butts, though they weren't that polite in their terminology. We rode all the way back to my house without stopping and collapsed in the front yard, laughing and gasping for breath. Dee Dee made the moment appropriately geeky by saying, "Feel the wrath of Garth Rocks at the barbarian." Wolf ripped up a handful of grass and threw it at him, starting a grass war that would leave bare patches on the lawn. But I didn't care. We just experienced the thrill of escaping annihilation. Bench was the hero, of course, but we were all in it together. Afterward, we lay on our backs, heads nearly touching, making a plus in the middle of our yard. Bench was lying to my right. "I don't believe you," I said to him. "Just glad I didn't miss," he said back. "They had it coming," Wolf said. Bench smiled, sort of proud of himself, I guess. I never saw that soccer ball again, and Bench never got around to replacing it. But I knew from that moment on that we counted on what we counted on him for. It wasn't until the next day, the Wednesday after the great confiscation, that the sticky notes became a thing. Not the fad that it would blossom into, or the monster that it would eventually become, but it was definitely a thing. It was just our thing. It started with Bench this time, leaving dumb jokes on all three of our lockers. Mine was, why wouldn't the man carry the grizzly on his back? The answer, found on the folded over flap at the bottom, because it was unbearable. The ones he left for Dee Dee and Wolf were even worse. But it was all right. I was glad to see that nothing had changed. Bench was still Bench. We were still us. Then there was the note Dee Dee stuck to my backpack as we passed it in the halls, showing a stick figure stabbing some other poor stick figure in his skinny stick back with a smaller stick. A gentle reminder that we had promised him we'd go dungeon diving this weekend. We always agreed to play reluctantly, made it out to be an act of kindness, us coming over to his house and nerding out with him. If we protested long enough, he'd make his mom stock up on Red Bulls and pizza rolls before we came. I think she was just happy her son had other kids to hang with. She'd probably buy us caviar if we asked. I confronted Dee Dee with a note and told him that Sarek, the elfish rogue, preferred Pringles with his demon slaying. He said he'd look into it. There was also the sticky note from Wolf, folded into force and passed to me in English that morning while Mr. Sword was detailing the difference between tragedy and comedy. Apparently, tragedy claimed that life was full of pain and suffering, moving inexorably towards death, and comedy said life was ridiculous and people were pretty much fools who sometimes stumbled upon happy endings. They both sounded about right to me. I took Wolf's note and unfolded it in my lap. Do you mind if she has lunch with us again? I looked over, and Wolf poked his chin at the door. Rose Holland hadn't moved closer to us, even though there was still an empty seat beside me. Today she had an oversized plaid button-down shirt, untucked, and the same dark blue jeans and black combat boots as the day before. It looked like maybe she'd raided her father's closet for something to wear, and her father was a lumberjack. She'd waved to us when she came in, but hadn't looked my way since. I held Wolf's note and stared. In a tragedy, Mr. Sword continued, the hero struggles against his inevitable fate, so it is naturally a losing battle. But in a comedy, he is often the victim of chance or coincidence, so even in his folly, he can still somehow do the right thing. Wolf raised his eyebrows at me. I shrugged. I wasn't sure what to say. Wasn't sure what he wanted me to say. Either answer, yes or no, seemed like it could cause a problem. Wolf didn't seem satisfied with my noncommittal shrug. But before he could write another sticky note, Mr. Sword swooped down on us, placing his hands on my desk. So how about it, Mr. Voss? Do you see yourself as the hero of a tragedy or a comedy? Are you fated to let your pride lead to your inevitable destruction? Or are you simply a fool being toyed with by forces beyond your control? I didn't like either option, really. I glanced at Wolf and then back at Mr. Sword. I'm pretty sure I'm just part of the chorus, I said. Apparently, it was a good answer because Mr. Sword laughed and let me off the hook. And a good thing, too, he said. They are usually the only ones still standing at the end. Mr. Sword went back to lecturing the class. Wolf let his question drop. I tried not to watch the clock above the door. Wolf's question was answered 3 periods later when I walked with Bench to the cafeteria. I realized then why Wolf was even asking. He wasn't seeking permission. He was just seeing how I felt about it. He'd already made up his mind. There they were, Rose and Wolf, sitting next to each other at the otherwise empty table, laughing like a couple of lunatics, like old friends. Beside me, Bunch grunted out a really? Again? I got behind him in line, and we snagged our spaghetti and weaved our way through the maze of tables. I sat down next to Dee Dee, who had snuck in while we were getting our food, forcing Bench to take the other empty seat, the one on Rose's right. Her tray had one of those fruit-filled snack pies on it, along with 3 celery stalks and a carton of milk. I wondered how the celery fit in with her stick-to-the-roof-of-your-mouth diet. Maybe she had a secret jar of peanut butter in her pocket to dunk them in. Bench scooted his chair over, deliberately giving himself extra elbow room, putting him closer to me. Rose didn't seem to notice. Wolf was just telling me about the time all 4 of you nearly blew your own lips off, she said. Bench raised his eyebrows. Dee Dee chuckled at the memory, though it really wasn't all that funny, not even a looking back on it now kind of way. We didn't almost blow our lips off, I said, though I guess we could have. We got a little singed, at least. Last summer, after the soccer ball to the head incident, the 4 of us tried to make our own dynamite. Not because we had anything in particular to blow up, save for a couple of Wolf's old models that he didn't like anymore. More because we were bored and couldn't think of anything dumber to do. It bothered me a little, Wolf telling Rose these kinds of things already. Not that our summer shenanigans were top secret or anything, though homemade bombs weren't exactly the kind of thing you wanted to brag about in school. Just that Wolf didn't make a habit of going around telling stories. He liked to keep things to himself. It was another thing I thought we had in common. A shoebox of leftover fireworks and your mom's stolen lighter are a dangerous recipe, Wolf said. We needed a longer fuse, Dee Dee remarked. I studied Dee Dee's face. He didn't seem that put out that there were 5 of us again, but it's not like he would have told Rose to get up and leave. He popped open his lunchbox and fished out his food like it was any other non-breadstick day. We needed some brains, Wolf corrected. I mean, whose idea was it to split open 300 black cats and empty the contents into a toilet paper roll and set it on fire anyways? The idea had been mine, actually, though I didn't care to admit it. It hadn't turned out as spectacular as I'd hoped. I was imagining Proton Torpedo blowing up the Death Star. It was mostly just loud and smoky. Our lips remained firmly attached to our faces, but the black smudge could still be seen on my driveway. Nothing quite gets out stupidity, not even bleach. Small town, I explained, long summers, and the public pool's always too crowded. You 4 need more hobbies, Rose said. Bench grunted and dug into his spaghetti. He seemed to be intent on finishing his food in record time. He hadn't said a word since we stepped out of line. Speaking of hobbies, Wolf said, did you know Rose is a professional origamist? Origamist, Rose said, and Wolf is exaggerating. I've only recently gone semi-pro. Here. She dropped the celery stalk she had been nibbling at and took the napkin off my tray without even asking. I watched her fold it in half. Pick an animal. Any animal at all. Me? I asked, wondering why I'd been singled out. I was supposed to be part of the chorus. I looked at Bench, who refused to look up from his food. I tried to think of something creative, something challenging, something impossible. Komodo dragon, I said. Wolf snorted. Really, Frost? She said any animal. It's all right, Rose said. I've got this. 1 Komodo dragon coming right up. The 4 of us sat and watched. Even Bench stopped scarfing his bowl of spaghetti, looking at Rose Holland over the top of his fork. She worked quickly, her hands moving almost as fast as Wolf's when they danced up and down his piano keys. Impossible to follow. Fold and crease and fold. Press and crease again. I watched something taking shape, though I couldn't make it out at first. Voila, Rose said after 20 seconds or so, handing my reshaped napkin back to me. I held it between us for a moment. I'm sure I looked confused. It's a fish, I said. Nope. Komodo dragon, she said. I held it up. Really? Because it seriously looks like a fish. It was definitely a fish. It may not have had a sword for a nose, but it was certainly no Komodo dragon. Rose leaned across the table, her face suddenly close to mine. Honestly, Frost, where's your imagination? Her breath smelled like celery and cinnamon gum. It's a very nice fish, Dee Dee said, snatching my napkin fish out of my hands and arcing it up and down through imaginary currents. He swam it up to Bench and pretended to tickle his cheek. Bench wrapped a fist around it, crumbling it, and then dropping it to his tray. Fish murderer, Dee Dee scoffed. Bench shrugged. Do one for me, Wolf said, snatching the napkin off Bench's tray this time and handing it over before he could snag it back. An elephant. No problemo, Rose said. 15 seconds later, she handed Wolf another fish. You forgot the trunk, he said. Then he took a stray strand of spaghetti from my plate and smushed it against the fish's nose, where it dangled. Perfect, Rose said. She turned to Dee Dee. How about it? What'll it be? A kangaroo? An armadillo? A three-toed sloth? Just name it, and the fabulous folding Rose will make it for you. But before he could answer, Josh Penn, a kid with a buzz cut and a habit of scratching his armpits in class, stuck his head between Bench and me and whispered, Evan Smalls is running the gauntlet. When? Bench asked, finally finding a conversation he wanted to be part of. Today? Josh nodded, scratched. 4:00. Why? I asked, but Josh ignored me. It was a stupid question anyway. The why was superfluous. Probably somebody had dared him to, and he didn't want to wuss out. Maybe it was an argument. Maybe just a challenge. Maybe it was a bet. It didn't matter, not to the people watching. What matters was that Evan was going to run. I glanced around the lunchroom, but I didn't see him anywhere. Josh Penn moved on to share the news with the next table, spreading it the old-fashioned way in light of everyone's phones being kept prisoner in the Big Ham's office. Evan Smalls, I repeated. I knew him. We weren't friends, obviously, but I had nothing against him. Nothing that would make me want to see him break his neck. He's going to kill himself, Dee Dee said, echoing my thoughts. His voice was matter of fact, like it was a foregone conclusion. Excuse me, but what the heck is a gauntlet? Dee Dee looked at Rose as if she had an alien crawling out of her throat. You're joking, right? You mean you've never heard of the gauntlet? Rose put up her hands in protest. All right. First off, you don't have to say it like that. You're not Han Solo talking about the Millennium freaking Falcon. Secondly, I just moved here 3 weeks ago, and I didn't get a chance to finish Frommer's Guide to Exploring Podunkville, Michigan, before I came. Is this some kind of stupid dare thing? Pretty much, Wolf said, with an emphasis on the stupid. Wolf had never been a fan of the gauntlet. I believe he once used the phrase immature, idiotic, macho load of bull hockey when describing it. He was in the minority, though. The rest of us knew better. It's the place where legends are born, I explained. It's basically this giant hill, completely covered with trees, and you walk your bike to the top and then try to ride back down as fast as you can. No brakes, without flipping or kissing bark. Dee Dee's right, it's completely suicidal. So you just ride down the hill? She asked. Yeah, but it's called running the gauntlet. And this is what you guys do for around here for fun? Not us. We make bombs, Wolf said proudly. And play Dungeons and Dragons, Dee Dee added. I think maybe he surprised himself by admitting that, because he started sucking on his juice box to keep from elaborating. And that boy who came around and told you why? So you can go and watch? I nodded. Wolf shook his head. I only watched once, Dee Dee said. Remember Kyle Ralston? I remembered. Kyle's nose was still crooked, and the scar on his leg where the bike's gears bit into him earned him lots of glances in gym class. Kyle had made it 2/3 of the way down. The farther you make it, the bigger the impact. Momentum is a killer. I'll be honest, it sounds kind of dumb, Rose said. It is, Wolf echoed. The two of them shook their heads at each other. Bench dropped his fork onto his plate. Well, I'm going, he declared. He turned to me. You'll be there, won't you? Suddenly, I was on the spot. I squirmed in my seat, sensing Bench boring holes into me on one side, and Wolf's sharp green eyes on me from the other. A simple enough question, except it wasn't simple at all. Bench was challenging me, and somehow I couldn't back down. Not in front of everyone. Not in front of Rose. What? Pass up a chance to watch someone plow into a tree at 40 miles an hour and possibly crack their skull open? Who wouldn't want to see that? I said half-heartedly. I didn't return Wolf's stare, or bother to look at Dee Dee either. I did glance over at Rose, just to see if I could tell what she was thinking, but there was no reading her expression. I did know one thing, though. When Bench punched me playfully on the shoulder after I agreed to go with him to watch Evan Smalls try to kill himself, it hurt a little. Bench picked up his tray and said that he was finished and that he needed to go get something from his locker before next period. We'll meet up after school, all right? He was speaking to me. Only to me. I gave the most imperceptible of nods. As he walked away, Wolf waved to him, but Bench's hands were so full he didn't wave back.